Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of Corralled Ghislaine. And yeah, I'm sorry this was supposed to be yesterday. Just pretend it was yesterday. It's still Monday, and you have the entire week in front of you, and everything is still looking good, and you have not yet figured out all the problems that you'll face this week. No, point is, I read the first two chapters of book two yesterday, and then I sat down to record the video, and my brain was empty because I was busy with a ton of other stuff. I had one release that showed up yesterday, so I spent a lot of time packing stuff, and then I did some work for a short film festival and other stuff, and brain's not good at the moment. Anyway, so I reread chapters 9 and 10, which are the first two chapters of book 2, and hopefully today I'll remember more of it, so we'll just give it a try for now, I guess. And here we go. Book 2, Fall of Light. Cheers. All right. So, chapters 9 and 10 are rather philosophical chapters in a lot of ways. Not much actually happens in, what you might call, action or anything like that. There's nothing like that. So, I'll try to figure out, themes and stuff and ramble around a bit, and we'll see how long this will take. And, where do we start? With, a few, smaller observations, I guess. We start out with another group that we haven't met before, that being in general people at House Draken's, at Draconis' home. And we start with everyone's favorite murder kids, those being Envy and Spite, who are hiding in the bowels of the house somewhere, and having discovered magic, because magic is coming back to the world. That's something that we'll have to talk about a lot more. But they have found magic, being calm, responsible people. They are obviously the best ones to have discovered magic, right? So they are still hiding and are planning to do more stuff with magic. They're mostly just insane. And something else is interesting there. There's that room in House Draken's that is locked, and there's footsteps in there, but no one knows who's in there. But apparently they have the power of cold darkness, at least cold or something like that. One thing that stuck out in that discussion, that conversation that Envy and Spite have with each other, apart from just being mean to each other and the world, and that's the idea that Draconis said that they were insane, and that was maybe because of their mother. And then the idea that with those names and everything around that, they never had the chance to actually be innocent. They were basically cursed by their parents, and that's something that we definitely should keep in mind. There is Envy and Spite are obviously terrible people, but they're also someone named them Envy and Spite. It's the whole Azathanite thing. It's how much can you blame those two kids for being absolute monsters? How much of a choice did they actually have in that? I feel that's sort of the question that is raised here, and that is something to consider there. It's when we look at blame, especially with young kids, how much of that is their own character, how much of a choice do they have? And yeah, obviously don't have any answers right now. Maybe we'll learn a little bit more about all Envy and Spite, but I just feel it's an interesting thing to consider with those two, because they are absolutely horrible and have been absolutely horrible so far, and there's no question about that. But the question is who's to blame? Is that 100% to be blamed on Envy and Spite? How much of a choice did they have? Because are they already old enough and adult enough to actually make these conscious decisions and choices in a way? And did they actually get a chance to be, become reasonable adults? Who knows? Well, we then have obviously our buddy Ivis, that's his name, Ivis, wandering around in the forest because he's traumatized and everything. And there's like a small thing that stuck out to me that I found like super fascinating. It's like when he walks there through those like needle trees, and he remembers that like in like the really deep frost in the north, those trees sometimes in winter explode because the sap in them freezes and then they explode. And the interesting thing there is that Stephen Erickson has had at some point in an interview, I think, he's told the story that he wrote about that being a fact in in Canada, and for like one of his like stories for his writing degree, and his teacher at the time, his professor at the time, uh, scolded him for putting such a ludicrous detail in there, the fact that trees would explode, because it was like supposed to be a realistic story. So having it back here in this fantasy story felt like just made me laugh or made me smile, because obviously it's true. It's just that yeah, I didn't see any like real other reason for it to actually show up here except self vindication. I don't know. It's still fun. But the main interest there is obviously the discussion, and once again, it's one of those themes that we've spoken about before and coming up again when Ivis talks to the denier shaman about hunting and stuff like that. And the idea there is that a hunter-gatherer society is slightly more peaceful in a way, because the innate violence, the innate drive to hunt and kill is still mostly used upon like animals, like the prey animals that hunting humans, or Teist in this case, prey upon. And that once that need for hunting falls to the wayside, humans start looking for other things to kill. Now this is like a very very bleak outlook on humanity, but maybe not one to be completely discarded, right? There's like the fact that Teist or humans are a rather aggressive species in a lot of ways, and that aggression seeks different outlets, I guess is the word there. Whether it's hunting or warfare or other sorts of violence in a way. And the question is there anything that can be done about it? Or are we basically, once we start the idea of settlement, of civilization, of settlements, of how and so forth, once we start that, we're basically doomed to tear each other apart, because we still have not figured out how to actually deal with that innate human aggression that we all share or have. Now, that's a question that I obviously don't know how to answer, but it's certainly one to consider. Because, you look around at this world, it's like we still haven't figured out how to not kill each other and not go to war. So it's an ongoing problem there. So there's that bit to think about. What else is interesting? We come back to Rennek, who is found by Anamander Rake and Caladan Brood for some reason, because he was freezing to death in the forest, and he has, because of his like pure mind, and not pure mind, but like will, mostly will, because we already know that he has like he's very like how to say, he's very very stubborn, to put it mildly, and that seems to attract dying gods. We'll need to figure out what that actually means, the whole gods idea here. But I guess those are mostly gods of the forest. We'll see. He has gathered those to him, and Anomander wakes him up, and they bring him back to life. Well, back to life, like nurture him back to life. He wasn't fully dead. That's sort of the point there. And then they decide to drop him off at House Drakens and give him in the care of Sanderlath Drukorlad, who is now mistress of House Drukorlad. Yeah, because her mother is dead, and we'll see how that all will work out in the future chapters, I suppose. One thing that was interesting, though, when they're talking about the idea of becoming a man, or what is typical for men, that being like to curl around like that inner pain or sorrow and make that like a core that you know gnaw upon and turn into, and that is something that makes men men. Well, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying it's certainly something you see a lot. The question is, what will that do to Rennick, who is like has still like a very naive understanding of the world. I just felt it's like an interesting thing to point out. From then on, though, I think like one thing that I found like fascinating in a way, and you can look at it for all kinds of things, when they near House Dragons. They see two ravens feeding on the corpse of a third raven, and is that a symbol or something connected to the two sisters who have killed their third sister, Malice? I don't know, but it's certainly possible. It just rang a bell. I mean, maybe it's just because we're all already in some way used to reading ravens as mystical or as birds of some importance in a way. So whenever ravens show up, we pay more attention than when, I don't know, finches show up or thrushes or whatever else the birds are out there. But crows and ravens are sort of what we are birds that we pay attention to, same as like eagles and a bunch of others. Maybe that's the reason why it stuck out, but still, that's sort of like something that I just found interesting to keep in mind, because it kind of resonated with that whole like two sisters killing their third sister. So there's that. But let's have us a bit of a look at the symposium, so to speak, or the evening meal at House Dragons with Ivis and the doctor, the new doctor, and the new housekeeper, not housekeeper, but keeper of the records. I'm still not good with the names there, so you have to excuse me there. But anyway, and I said symposium for a reason, because like the whole way that their debate is set up, their debate is set up, is reminded me a lot of like what you might call your typical Platonic dialogues that also have that kind of setting in yeah, that have that kind of setting with people coming together debating something, and then there's someone leading on the questions, like obviously someone is asking questions, someone else is like giving answers, there's obviously leading questions and so forth. The whole way was set up with like then Ives telling the story that Draconis told him about civilization, which you have that a lot in like Platonic dialogue as well. When you have your like when play usually Socrates drags out some kind of old what you might call a mythos and explains it, some myth, and then like uses it to explain something else and so forth. In this case, obviously, the myth he tells, the story is the story of Gothos and the death of civilization. Which we have like interesting things to look there at there. The idea that civilization starts out as an idea to save, to protect the weak or less capable from the more powerful, to create a system of safety and so forth. Rules of safety mostly. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that over time these become more and more complicated, and thus turn around into a system to protect and privilege those in power, and to subjugate those without power. That power over time changing to monetary wealth and stuff like that, which we then see in that side debate on money and and health, which we'll have to go to in a second. And that the idea that like every civilization is over time doomed to become its own, like the opposite of what it was what is set out to be, and thus the Jacquard idea to kill their own civilization, because yeah, not a good place to go. Now, the other part that I found interesting there is that debate on health and healthcare. which it is literally. So the idea, the question obviously is what happens now that we have discovered the magic of denial that can potentially heal all kinds of wounds and so forth, and thus minimize suffering immensely. Can't kill death, which obviously, and this is like another thing that I found very interesting earlier on, the debate about the idea that the healer's work is always a path of retreat. It's always a fight that you cannot win because you're fighting against death, and death is inevitable. You can only prolong the inevitable. Now, the point that I wanted to make, though, is another one. That is the idea that once you have magic, readily available magic, that can solve health problems, the question is like, why shouldn't you just not? Why shouldn't you actually give that to anyone? And Ivis's idea that over time, or was it the doctor's idea, that over time every service will be valued monetarily, and thus health will only be affordable for those who can, for those who can actually afford it. On the other hand, you will also see the fact that having health in a world where religion kind of dies, and that's sort of the other argument there, that once human or Teist have all these powers, magical in their case, in our case scientific powers, we don't actually believe in gods anymore. But we then, because we still have that idea of justice, that the world follows some kind of rules of justice, we then come and see bodily, physical or mental health or prosperity as signs of a moral judgment. It's something that we already have. It's like people that are healthy or wealthy are presumed to be so for moral reasons. They must be doing something right and good and so forth. You obviously have that whole idea with the idea of grace and support in like a Calvinist capitalist mashup in the US, where you go like, people that are successful in life are obviously so because they already have God's graces, and that brings with it all kinds of toxic problems we're not going to go into tonight, but it's there. And the danger is there as well with health. It also comes to the point where and this is sort of like the drinking, or in her case with the keeper of records, the smoking argument, that if you deliberately take that health risk for something that is not perceived as valuable, like for example smoking or drinking or so forth, this will lead to social stigmatization, right? It's like you are doing something that is considered morally wrong, even though you're not doing it to anyone else. Now with smoking, obviously there is that idea, it's a problem of like smoking in public places. You obviously make other people to breathe your smoke and so forth. So it's not only your own idea, but still the idea, not only your own decision in a way. And yeah, but it's exactly that problem that we start to stigmatize people's decisions over their own bodily integrity or health or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, there's a lot discussed in that one evening meal, and it's certainly something that we should keep in mind for the future. And yes, the parallels to like a Platonic dialogue felt really strong for me in that one. Another thing I feel is in the discussion between Caliban Brood and Anamander Rake on Rake's role within the coming civil war, and whether it is whether he understands or whether he wants to support Urisander and the claim of the common soldiers or the claim of the nobles, and Rake's idea that neither one has actually a good claim, and that the only argument of of nobility is basically to keep their privilege and limited. And yeah, the main issue there that I feel is interesting is Anamander's declaration of like if you want politics. I mean, obviously, politics is not the correct word there, but the question is like, if he would ever be a king, what kind of things, what kind of virtues he espouses, and he's like, it's not liberty, because liberty, is only like a lie about wanting like the personal supremacy and personal like lack of responsibility. And Anamander Rake's virtue that he would espouse would be responsibility for one's actions and other actions. And that, I feel, is a very important argument to keep in mind when reading anything that Stephen Erickson writes or has written, when it comes to the ideas like which in those questions of power and like personal questions in general, personal responsibility is something that is sort of key to a lot of the decisions that people make in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, or in The God Is Not Willing, or obviously in the Carcanas trilogy. So keeping that one in mind might be good, I guess. All right, let's see how much else I can remember, because my brain's still kind of fuzzy. All right. Obviously, the beginning of magic in Carcanas itself, and whether they can start like what to do with it, how to use it or not to use it, and the discussion of faith and what faith does and what knowing does. Now, this is like something that is personally like near and dear to my heart. The question, the definition of faith being about the knowing of things that can't be known. And this is, I feel, very important, and something that a lot of like today's outspoken atheists can't wrap their heads around, because they're so self-important, and their main enemy is not so much faith, but their main enemy is organized religion, which has a lot of problems, obviously, but that's a different thing. Actual faith, is very much about the conscious or subconscious decision. That's sort of kind of the question there, to take some things on faith, as it were, which means to give them the same status in one's personal epistemological system. What I mean by that is that once we, what we do when we make decisions, at least when we kind of make conscious decisions that are not just like reflexes and stuff like that, when we do that, what we do is we base those on things we know, or things we think we know, which I guess is more accurate, but never mind. And there is some things that and things that we know have like a higher like value or more impact on our decisions than things we suspect, or things we in a non-religious way believe. It's like those are like things we are uncertain about, I guess, because knowledge is all about certainty. And now what faith does, what religious like spiritual faith does, is it gives us another set of ideas, opinions and so forth that we can't on a scientific basis, logical basis, know, but that have the same epistemological value or the same impact on our decision making as do things that we logically, scientifically can know. That is where actual faith resides. It's and why it is so difficult to explain it, because it's a more or less conscious decision to take specific things for knowledge that we can't ever actually know, and put them into our overall system of things we hold to be true. So yeah, that discussion, just like because it's something that I'm personally like very much interested, kind of rang with me in ways that it probably didn't with most of you. I don't know, but now you know. Now you know why I have issues with atheists. But it's a very different story. What else is in that part? Um, an interesting thing that I found fascinating for a while, at least, was the point when Colaris is on his way out with Grip Gallus and Histula and Pelk, and the idea of melancholia, that like soldiers find it very, very difficult to leave behind their life of being warriors, of being soldiers in a way, leaving behind that lifestyle. And yeah, I can see that. What I find interesting, however, is that it's something that we see as well with quite a few people in our lives, in our world, not only soldiers, because I have no idea about soldiers, but for example, athletes, or say musicians, that have built like their so much of their identity about being extremely good, or like also in extreme situations, like high profile athletes that after like actually ending their careers tend to do comebacks because apparently they have like nothing else to do with their lives, which especially I guess with athletes is an interesting thing, because most like really high level athletes end their careers in around their 30s, because it's really tough on your body. But then you have a lot of those people trying comebacks again and again and again, because there's very little else in their life, because they've built so much of their identity around that one thing, which I guess is one of the ways we can start to take the whole idea of like how we sublimate in a way that urge to kill and hunt that we still have from our hunter-gatherer days. Is probably like athletics and sports is one of the ways we do that. And I said, like with musicians, especially like rock musicians, you see the same thing as like bands that they do farewell tours and then they come back and then they end it again and then they come back again until like, because yeah, it's sort of like the entirety of your identity is what you do afterwards. You can't just go home and start growing roses or whatever. That's not how that shit works. Not how that ever worked. So yeah, that's something that I found just like interesting to look at. Just as well as the idea of ownership. Once those deniers show up that are on the way to Emerland, wherever Emerland is, we'll see. I mean, we'll find out about that rather soon. So, what do I mean there? This question is like, yeah, how does such a thing as land ownership actually come together? Now, property is something that philosophers have thought about a lot, and in this case, we don't really go into the discussion. Like, Histula just claims that she owns the forest, and deniers say, now, fuck you, why would you own that? That was there before you came here, and so forth. But it's like an interesting thing to look at, because a lot of times we claim ownership over things that we clearly have no ownership over. So seeing where that whole thing is going in the future is definitely something that I find interesting, I guess. So yeah, there just like a small bit that I found, as I said, interesting. What else did I forget? Oh yeah, the idea of Ibis, like Ibis's youth with the Jellican when he was in that caravan, and the Jellican overtook it. And we just see once again that whole idea of one of the themes that comes up with Stephen Erickson's writing again and again, the idea of civilization overtaking, like growing larger into like places, and yeah, the of civilization growing over there and taking over other places. If I mean, you see that description of what they did with the Jellican, and you don't think of like how like white Western settlers took over and fucked over Native Americans, then you're probably not reading correctly. I mean, or not, reading with your mind open in a way. And yeah, we have that part there, which I found just an interesting thing. Another thing that I found fascinating is Grizz and Fal's memory, or so to like, of his youth and his sojourn again amongst the Furlcan or Folklore Assail, whom he then all slaughtered because he despised the way they had subverted or perverted justice. And here's an interesting thing: that notion of justice, that we all have, and no one knows where it comes from in a way, is something that has been in the Carcanas trilogy. It has been in Forge of Darkness. It is in Fall of Light, and something that I suspect we'll see forever on. And the amount of rage injustice can conjure up in each and every one of us when we come across it. That rage against the universe for being unjust because the universe just doesn't care. And on the other hand, the perversion of justice through too many words, because that's sort of, I guess, the other side of that is like, you can argue justice on a logical level, and then you can just like play around with semantics a lot. And that's possible. And I'm not saying there's no like good reason for that. There's a reason for written laws and all of that. But at some point, lawful is no longer the same as just. Those are different. Those are very, very different things, and they can lead to a lot of rage. And apparently, they did with Grisinfal. Now, the question I have is Grisinfal going to be, because we learned that he is apparently worshipped by some Forlcan now as the god of justice. Is Grisinfal the god of the Folklore Assail, whom they murder, and who is then the weird divers on the glass desert in the Crippled God? I mean, probably not, but maybe? I don't know. It remains to be seen, I guess. What else? I feel I've been rambling way too long already. But let's look at like one final thing. A conversation between Orphantal and Rais Harad, the historian, before they all go to Mother Dog, whatever the fuck goes on there. I mean, we're going to talk about that in a second. Orphantal and the idea of like the dream that he has, that what drives a lot of us is either anger or fear, or yes, our attempt to escape something behind us, fleeing forward. And yeah, that's just something that I feel is very, very common in a lot of people's lives, and even excluding my own from that. So that was just very, I don't know, powerful in a way. But let's look quickly at what happens when they enter the realm of elemental dark. They obviously they like go through a gate into a different place, which I find interesting, because what that basically would mean at this point is that the realm of elemental dark, the hold of darkness, so to speak, is not the same as Corel Galen, right? Because those, like the physical realm of Corel Galen, that being Carcanas and its surrounding feudalistic society, nope, it has to be something else, which has like weird demons that get punched up by get punched by Draconis and stuff. But that's an interesting aspect there. So I have no idea how that works, and I hope I'll learn more about it. Then obviously we need to figure out what it means when Grisinfal says that he's there to observe the end. The end of what? The end of Corel Galen, the end of unified Tysdom. Kind of difficult to figure out, I guess, at this point. But yeah, as it's getting dark and I'm almost in elemental darkness at this point, I figure it's time to end it for today, and I'll ramble more tomorrow about the next 2 chapters of Book 2 of Fall of Light, and hopefully my mind will be a little bit more structured tomorrow. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching if you made it this far, and I'll talk to you tomorrow about more of it. Until then, cheers.